I am thrilled to be back here in Charleston. This area is booming. It is absolutely booming. Yesterday, Steve Warner gave me a drive around town. He showed me some areas that are in the process of developing, some future sites for development, and some of the great companies that are already here and thriving, including that giant Boeing facility out by the airport. And I have to agree with David's comments. There's an element of vision that it takes to plan a region's development and future growth. I think the Craven family is emblematic of that, so congratulations to you. But I want to extend those congrats to the folks at the CRDA. I think they're doing a brilliant job. I travel all over the world, and I have to tell you, the growth and prosperity that's happening here in the Charleston region, in these 3 counties, you're operating at epic levels of achievement on a global scale. You're growing at a rate like an Asian country is growing right now. There are other countries in Europe that would crave these results that you've achieved here. So congratulate yourselves. I think you've got great leadership here. Happy to be with you all today. Thanks. You know, I like to think about the future. I like to talk about the future. And I talk to scientists and technologists wherever I go. A couple of years ago, I had the honor of meeting Ray Kurzweil. We were both speakers at an event. He is a renowned futurist. And he made this statement. He said, we're going to experience more change in the next decade than in the previous 100 years. I said, Ray, you say that to everybody. What does that mean? If you think about it, you know, the 20th century was an amazing century. We had the invention of penicillin, nuclear power, television, film, the radio, and of course, computers and the internet and all these great technologies. And so you think about that, you go, well, what could we possibly do in the next 10 years that could beat that? I'm about to share some of that with you, so brace yourselves. This is going to be a wild ride. I wanted to give you some thoughts about what I see as the trends that are going to shape the next 20 years. You folks have done an amazing job in the last 20 years, but now let's look out a little bit. Since 2001, the world's changed in a significant way. When I was at Sony Pictures, I noticed this. In 2001, there were 250 million people using the internet and 500 million mobile phones. I didn't know that. I was like, wow, that mobile phone business is actually kind of an interesting business. So I left there and got into mobile. And in the 10-year span, we've grown those figures tenfold. There are 2.5 billion people using the web today and 6 billion mobile phones in use. And by next year, we'll cross the 3 billion user threshold. There'll be 3 billion people. More than a third of humanity will be connected and ability to share information freely around the world. That's quite an extraordinary achievement. And look what happens. The mobile phone puts the power of the internet in everybody's hand. And the cost of entry is so low that that's how the next billion or 2 billion of people are going to reach it. This idea of using a computer, sitting in front of a computer, is kind of an old school thought. So keep an eye on that mobile phone, because what the mobile does is it puts me in media. It gives me the ability to publish, communicate, connect with other people all over the world. And we're starting to see some of the impact when you have billions of people connecting. Here's one example. This is a chart that I just saw. It shows the number of photos taken each year. It's a little hard to read, so I'll tell you where it ends up at, because that's the interesting part. On the far right, 350 billion photos, that's billion with a B, are taken each year. Now you'll notice there's one line that drops down, it kind of droops down. That's the number of analog photos, photos taken with film. And so if you've wondered what happened to Kodak and Fuji and those companies, that's kind of an illustration of that. And that actually is a good, kind of a good signal for you. If you pick the right technology path, you can prosper, but if you stick to the old path, sometimes you'll find you're just made irrelevant and your business goes away. So where are those photos being posted? Well, the people who run Flickr, which is part of Yahoo, they're quite proud to talk about the fact that they breached the 6 billion photo threshold. 6 billion photos have been uploaded to Flickr, which is a photo sharing site. I thought that was pretty remarkable until I saw this. Now this diagram shows you the little teeny tiny dark red dot in the corner there is all the photos in the Library of Congress. That next shaded area is all the photos that are on Instagram, which, as you know, is that really fast-growing service that Facebook bought a year ago. And then Flickr with the 6 billion photos, that's kind of the shaded area on the left. But Facebook with 1.2 billion users now has 250 billion photos uploaded, and some staggering number of photos are being uploaded every single day. The vast majority of these are coming from mobile phones, those smartphones with cameras built into it. And it's not just photographs. Every 60 seconds, we produce a torrent of new information, a tidal wave of information. Some 350,000 photos are uploaded to Facebook every minute. 125,000 tweets are sent out, 700,000 searches. And on YouTube, a staggering 100 hours of video is uploaded every minute of every day. When I talk to television companies, I try to remind them that in the digital arena, their priceless library of content is just a tiny drop in a vast ocean of media that's being uploaded by people who use mobile phones. So in 2009, we crossed an interesting threshold. We crossed the 1 zettabyte threshold. As you can see, this chart from The Economist, the research from IDC is commissioned by the hard drive companies, the companies that make storage. And as you can see, they show in the bottom the available storage had been outstripped by that point. By 2009, great news if you're in the hard drive business. It's like the Full Employment Act for hard drive manufacturers and their employees. But I put a little circle around that threshold in the middle of 2009, 2010. We crossed the 1 zettabyte threshold, and you may be wondering, what's 1 zettabyte? Let me explain that to you. So you know a megabyte, right? You take a photograph with your camera, and that's probably a megabyte or 2 megabytes of information. If you store it on a flash drive like this holds 1 gigabyte of information. That used to be more memory than any computer had. Nowadays, it costs a couple bucks at an office supply store. If you back up your computer, you probably bought a terabyte drive. That would be 1,000 gigabytes of data. And if you had 1,000 of those, that's a petabyte. And in the old days, we used to measure information in the scale of petabytes, and 1,000 of those is an exabyte. Well, 1,000 exabytes is a zettabyte. Okay, so you're going, well, my mind is spinning, right? You can't keep these numbers. Let me put that in perspective for you. That's 250 billion DVDs. You could fill football stadiums with DVDs with that much information. That's how much we produce in a single year. Or if you want to put it really in perspective, think of this little 1 gigabyte flash drive, and now think of a stack of 1 million of these. And now think of 1 million stacks of 1 million of these. That's what a zettabyte is. That's how much information we produce as a society every single year since 2009. But it isn't slowing down. On the contrary, it's picking up. So in 2009, we produced 1 zettabyte. We crossed that threshold. And they predict that by 2020, we will, as a society, produce 35 zettabytes of information. This is just an incredibly rapidly growing part of our economy. It's invisible to most of us. Most of us don't see it. We experience it in the form of great new services that are supplied to us over the internet, but we can't really see it. It's kind of an invisible dimension of our economy. I wanted to share that with you because if I had to characterize the time that we live in now and the next 20 years, I would describe it as a new information age. I know you've heard that phrase so many times, by now we're numb to it, right? The information age, we've been hearing it since the 1970s. What does it really mean? Well, for most of us, this is what we experience, right? Too much email, too many text messages, too many documents to read, too much stuff, too many files to back up. But a lot of businesses are now starting to look at information as one of their primary assets. And I don't just mean the high-tech companies. There's a phrase that futurists like to use. They say that data is the new oil, in the sense that it's a resource that is abundant, that can be mined and can be utilized and transformed and create new wealth. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. I want to share with you a new narrative about information, not that old story of the information age. Let me share with you what I see happening with information. There's really 2 parts to this story. The first part is that we're using information science, computers, and all the tools of software that we've had to develop information science and develop all those great internet services. We're starting to apply that to real things. So we're now taking information and designing new things at the molecular level, or in biology at the cellular level. Last year, you probably heard about 3D printing, right? And perhaps you've even checked out a 3D printer. They had one at Dig South, I think, in the springtime here. There was an event that Stanfield Gray organized, and they were showing all kinds of new cool technology. You may have heard of it. You may know that last year was a year when we broke an important threshold. The cost of a 3D printer, a desktop-sized 3D printer, dropped below $1,000. So that made it accessible, within reach of consumers. It's still a little pricey, and candidly, these devices, they're a little finicky. They're for hobbyists. It's early days. Think of it as like the very early days of the computer industry in the early 1980s. And you'll remember, if you think back to that time, we had printers, but printers were noisy and cumbersome. It wasn't something that people had handy around. But in a very short period of time, in the 1980s, we went from those noisy dot matrix printers to laser printers. And suddenly the price on those dropped, and then suddenly we got into the era of desktop publishing. So that characterized the 1980s, and it transformed the printing industry, it transformed the publishing industry. It made everybody a publisher. Well, now they expect, with the price drops and the increasing power of these 3D printers, we're going to move from an era of desktop publishing to desktop manufacturing. Crazy concepts. Let me share some of what I mean by that. So today, what you can print on a 3D printer is a plastic part. So when I first got acquainted with this a few years ago, someone said, well, for instance, let's suppose a part broke in your dishwasher. And you could then ask the manufacturer and download, perhaps they could email you, or you could download instructions on how to print out a replacement part. And I thought, really, that's what this magnificent new technology is all about, fixing a part of my dishwasher? It just didn't seem to make any sense. I wasn't very moved by that. When you look at the kinds of things that people are making, it's not just plastic parts. You can make shapes that can't be milled or cut. So an old traditional industrial process is about removing material. 3D printing is about adding material, and you add it with precision. So you're only adding that material that you absolutely need. This is a very, very efficient way to produce. But still, from a consumer level, this is the kind of thing that you can make. So it's not mind-blowing. You're wondering, well, where's that epic shift in society going to occur? Will it be these designers who are using it for these fanciful outfits? I don't necessarily think so. But I know there's folks here who are familiar with the aeronautic business, and you're certainly familiar with the LEAP engine from GE and their partner CFM, and they are now introduced this engine, and they're taking orders. I think they'll start shipping in 2016. This is an engine, a jet engine that will actually use 3D printing for manufacturing, not for design. For 20 or 30 years, we've been using 3D printing for rapid prototyping and manufacturing process. But this engine, this jet engine will actually be using 3D for the fuel nozzle. So they're building a part that simply couldn't be manufactured any other way, and they're using 3D printing for that. I think there are now some $68 billion of sales booked already by GE for this engine, and that will be on Boeing jets in the near future. Automobile manufacturers have always used 3D printing to prototype, but now this project in Detroit, this is called URBI. And it's an automobile design that is designed on computers and now printed with computers using 3D printing. This is a car that, when it comes out next year, it's supposed to be able to drive across the country on a single tank of gas. So keep your eye out for the URBI vehicle. Now, when you build a home, when you build a new house, most people can't read a blueprint. And actually, if you think about a blueprint, it's kind of a funny artifact from a bygone era, right? Why are they blue? Why are they so hard to read? No one knows. So most people can't understand blueprints. So they say in the future, your home builder will give you a nice little model, almost like a doll's house, a 3D printed model exactly of your house. Everybody can understand that. You get that, you go, sure. But what you might not know is that they're already building houses. This company, D-Shape, that's a giant 3D printer, and it lays down a composite that consists of concrete and plastic. So these are truly weatherproof materials, materials that are highly durable, that'll last for a long time. And they can build shapes that couldn't be manufactured any other way. They can't be built out of ordinary materials. And now just recently I saw that there's a new company, a printer that can build a house in 20 hours. So you can see tremendous innovation and progression is happening here. And all the folks here that are in the manufacturing business, I'm sure you're well aware of the impact of 3D printing on your prototyping and potentially also in your manufacturing process. We'll soon see 3D printers in space. NASA has been a big proponent of this. You know, the prospect of lifting material from Earth and taking it into space really is kind of an inefficient thought if you think about it. You know, all that thrust that's needed to get that stuff into orbit. Why not use asteroids or, you know, maybe on the surface of the moon, start to manufacture things? NASA is planning a mission to Mars. They have to be mission ready to go to Mars at some point in the future. And the thought is that those astronauts will have to be self-sufficient. They'll need to manufacture things on the ground there. And so they've just recently, a few weeks ago, approved a 3D printer that can be used on the space station. So they'll start to test out in low gravity or zero gravity how these things perform. It's not just for cars and airplanes, though. It's also for some rather intimate parts. Anyone know what this thing is that I'm showing you here? Yes, it's a mandible. Very good call. So that is a human jaw. It's an anatomically precise human jaw that's been printed with a 3D printer. So the way this works is the doctor will take a 3D scan of your face. If you need to have that bone replaced, you no longer have to use a standard part for that. They can actually put a jaw that exactly matches your previous jaw in your face. You can imagine how traumatic it is to wake up from surgery, from any kind of bone surgery. I've had it. It's very painful. But now imagine your jaw has been replaced and your jawline's different. It would change your face. It would change your identity. That could be quite traumatic for people. So this is a great big breakthrough. It's not limited to joints. It's not limited to bones. That's where the technology is today. This is a human liver. This is a human liver that was printed on a 3D printer in Japan. It is not functional. But what they're doing is instead of depositing layers of plastic or ceramic or metal, they're depositing layers of skin cells, and they can actually build up a human organ. Now, this particular one doesn't have the vascular part working yet, so they have to continue to work on that. But they predict within 10 years that they'll be able to manufacture replacement parts for bodies. They call them bioprinters. And in China, just a few weeks ago, they announced the first commercially available bioprinter that is available. So you can actually print human body parts. We won't need motorcycle drivers to donate body parts to us anymore. We'll be able to get a body part that is made from your own cells. Just yesterday, a friend shared this with me. Scientists have developed a way to print stem cells, human stem cells, for the very first time. So you'll actually be able to manufacture stem cells. So as you can see, we're using information science here to build things at the cellular level or build things at the molecular level. And this isn't all just about industry, because remember, there's a great democratizing trend at work here. Let me show you this example that I just saw last night. I added into this talk this morning.
Walt Disney once said that animation can explain whatever the mind of man can conceive. He was talking about cartoons, but advances in technology have taken that basic concept to a whole new dimension. Michelle Miller shows us how the idea of a modern-day inventor became a 3D reality.
Grabbing a backpack is hardly the feat of a superhero, unless you're 12-year-old Leon McCarthy and your hand looks like it's straight out of a science fiction movie.
You've actually become sort of a
cyborg.
There's a cool factor.
Yeah, it's like it's special instead of different.
Leon has been special since birth. While he was still in the womb, restricted blood flow prevented his hand from developing.
I saw his hand sticking up and there were no fingers on it. It was hard for my wife, it was hard for me.
2 years ago, his father, Paul, began the search for an inexpensive, functional prosthetic. What he found was this internet video posted by Ivan Owen, an inventor in Washington State.
I've always had this vision of people being able to build their own prosthetic device at home.
Owen and a collaborator in South Africa designed a hand that could be made by a three-dimensional printer.
It's essentially like a hot glue gun. There's plastic that feeds into it. The printer head gets really hot, it liquefies that plastic, and then layer by layer creates an object.
The design relies on wrist movement. Downward motion creates cable tension that closes the fingers, while a move upward opens them. The assembly instructions were posted for free on the internet, so someone like Paul McCarthy in Marblehead, Massachusetts, could print it. He took the idea to his son.
I thought he was a little crazy. He was like, we can print all these fingers and then like clip them all in, and it was a little too much.
The first time you saw it and when you tried it out,
it was pretty awesome, yeah.
What made it awesome?
I could pick up, say like a water bottle, like say I could pick up my pencil.
What is it like to see him with this?
Making your kids happy is like the most rewarding thing you can have as a dad.
It's a do-it-yourself solution that was unthinkable before technology made ideas printable.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Michelle Miller, CBS News, Marblehead, Massachusetts.
Think about that. That's the magic of the era that we live in now. A dad at home can download instructions from the internet and print out a new working hand for his child. This is the power of information democratized and shared by millions of people. It's such a great illustration, too, because the people who collaborated to design that part, they're not even in the same city. One is based in Seattle, the other is in South Africa. The father who downloaded is in Massachusetts. That's kind of the era that we live in. I want to talk a little bit about material science. And again, here we're using information to reshape the material world. We're using information to create new things. You probably have heard about graphene. Graphene is a new kind of material that was invented by information scientists. It's 1 atom thick. It's the thinnest material in the world. It's a superconductive material, and it will revolutionize computing. Briefly, it'll change the way memory works. It'll mean that we can put the memory much closer to the computing in the computer. It should drop computing costs by half, and this material will be available commercially next year. It's also going to have a transformative effect on batteries and storage. And as everybody in the power industry knows, what's holding us back from renewable energy, wind power and solar power, is the ability to store it and have that available when we need it. And so there's a possibility that graphene could help us tremendously there. So this is a material that was designed on a computer and now is coming into production in the next year. I've just learned about nanocellulose, which has been around for quite a while, but again, information science has improved it. Nanocellulose comes from trees. They break down the tree and they can transform it into this clear gel that has some extraordinary properties. It's lighter than steel, it's lighter than carbon fiber. It has the ballistic properties of Kevlar. It's bulletproof. You can brush it, you can pour it, you can cast it. It is transparent, it's also conductive, and because it comes from trees, it's cheap and sustainable. There's one factory in the US and I think 3 in North America that are now producing nanocellulose. And you may have heard about the aerogels. These are amazing, amazing new technology, new materials, again, designed on a computer. And what they basically do is they create space in the material. So you get this material that's super light but super stiff, and it can support a great deal of weight. So we're designing at the molecular level. We're using information science to recreate the world, recreate the materials that we build things from. And these are truly the building blocks for many of our manufacturing industry. One more thought that I thought was relevant here, because you have such a focus on manufacturing here in the 3-county region, I thought I'd talk a little bit more about robotics. Now, everyone who's been to an auto plant, you're aware that for the last 20 years, this is what an auto plant has looked like. There aren't very many auto workers on that factory floor. Mostly what you see are robots. But if you notice, they have walls around the robots, and that's to protect the actual workers. These robots are dangerous. They are blind. They can't tell if they're around anybody. They can't see anyone, so they can actually kill you. That's why there are no people in the plant. You have people managing the robots, but they're in a different facility. They're outside of that robot floor. They also cost a great deal. These robots cost hundreds or millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. They cost millions of dollars to program. So this is not technology that is available to the local manufacturer, the small manufacturing company. But that's changed as well. Baxter Robot was just introduced this summer. It's a $20,000 robot that you can set up in an hour and a half. Any worker can train Baxter, not to replace him, but to help him. So this is something that actually supplements and enhances the ability of workers. You can pick the robot up and you can move it to a new place. You can retrain it again an hour later. It can be doing, packing something, lifting something, and so on. And the best thing about it is this is a robot that's aware of people. It can see people, it has a friendly face, and so it's not going to accidentally crash into you or hurt you. We have robot cars in California. Have you heard about the Google cars? These are robot vehicles. They drive themselves. They're legal in California, Nevada, and in Florida, and I don't know why they're not legal here. You do have traffic problems to be concerned with, as we do in California. Something to consider. It's not just robots in cars. We have robots in bars. This is in Berlin. Robot bartenders are now available, working. A year ago, the first robot restaurant was announced, where all those jobs people are flipping burger patties. Those jobs have been eliminated, I'm sorry to say, replaced by automation. What it does is actually frees the workers in the restaurant to actually deal with customers and give them better service. Robots are also crucial for privatized space. This is a picture of SpaceX, Elon Musk's company that is now supplying the space station, and that is an entirely robotic vehicle. It could have human pilots, but for cost reasons, they don't need all the life support systems. They're able to deliver supplies to the space station with a robot vehicle. And of course, don't forget, 100 million miles away, we have a little robotic version of human consciousness that's roaming around on another planet. This is quite an extraordinary achievement we tend to overlook. But this is another great achievement of humanity. We've sent a robotic extension of our senses to another planet that is now roaming around autonomously, gathering soil samples, analyzing them, and sending data back to Earth. And of course, we also have the scary prospect of flying killer robots. These Predator drones have been with us for many years, flying some 40 missions a day in Afghanistan. And then there's this. This is the world's fastest robot. It's called Cheetah when it was in the lab, developed by Boston Dynamics. And here you can see they're doing a speed test. At the end of this clip, the robot runs 28 miles an hour, which is faster than Usain Bolt, faster than the fastest human. So I showed this video to some friends this summer, and they said, yeah, but Rob, look, it's on a treadmill in a lab. There's all those wires and cables connected to it, so the thing is more like a theory. It's not practical reality. I thought, well, they have a good point, until I saw this video just a couple weeks ago. And so here is the Cheetah taken out of the lab. Now it's called Wildcat. And as you can see, it's an autonomous robot that can run as fast as a thoroughbred horse. It looks cute in the beginning. Just keep watching. So here you have it replicating a horse's gallop. And as that thing runs by, you start to realize it can continue running at that pace all day long, even though you can't. You sure would hate to have that thing charging after you in a war zone or some other place. So That is kind of a breakthrough, I think, for robotics. And there's tremendous amounts of progress being made on this front right now. To summarize this section, what we're doing is we're reprogramming the world. We're using information science to reprogram the world around us and create entirely new structures. And typically we build them at the molecular level, or in the case of biology, at the cellular level. So we can now design that on a computer and print it or manufacture it in a laboratory, sometimes using a 3D printer, sometimes using robotic technology like this. Those are some of the advances that are coming. And I call that turning information into physical things. And as amazing as that is, there's a flip side to this argument. And I'm about to share that with you. The flip side is turning things into pure information. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at an event here called Dig South, which was a very cool showcase of digital technologies from the region and also from outside the region. And there I gave a talk called VAPORIZED. Let me share with you just a few thoughts from that talk. So in 2001, this was considered a smartphone. This is a RIM BlackBerry pager. We called it smart because it comprised 4 things into one: email, your phone call, your address book, and your pager, all into one device. So that was a smartphone back in those days. In just a 10-year span, your smartphone has absorbed the functionality of about 25 different consumer electronics devices: game machines, video players, video recorders, cameras. I had some role to play in launching some of those technologies in the early 2000s, and I can tell you it was an extraordinary ride. Now, the companies that manufacture cameras and video cameras and so forth, those Japanese consumer electronics companies, have experienced double-digit declines in the sales of those products that coincide with the advent of the modern smartphone since 2007, when Apple introduced the iPhone, and then Samsung and the Google phone started to come out and hit the market as well. So there's been a massive shift now. People simply don't need to buy that other stuff. They don't need to carry around all those other gizmos when they go on a trip. They don't have to carry the chargers and the batteries and the supplies and all that stuff, because now it's all built into your phone. We've become so conditioned to this that we don't even think twice about it. We now live in a world where 1 million apps are at your disposal, at your fingertips. And so no matter what context you're in, whatever situation you find yourself in, you may say, oh, I wonder if there's an app for it. Usually there's 3 or 4 apps for it, and you can download it with just a click of a button. Maybe it costs $1, maybe it's free, and instantly you've extended the capabilities of your device with software. Every one of those 1 million apps used to be a physical product that was sold in a store. That's what I talk about when I say vaporized. And that process won't stop. This is the year when the mobile phone will start to replace the things that are in your wallet: your ID cards, your boarding passes, your driver's license, your credit cards, and so forth. Massive initiative underway. And so when I say vaporized, what I really mean is we're taking physical things and turning them into invisible software. And the through line there, the key takeaway for today's talk, is that whatever can become information will be. Whatever part of your business or product consists of information, well, that information now can be liberated and delivered over a digital network, a wireless network or a wired network. It can be delivered to people and actually new value. It can be delivered as an entirely new service to people. And if you don't do that, someone else will. And they can steal the information value in your physical products. They can liberate that and create an entirely new business. By the way, this is a lively area of competition in the digital media right now. All sorts of companies are looking around saying, gee, what's an old school business? Yesterday I spoke to the folks from Boomtown, and they're in the process of equipping real estate brokers with a tool that enables them to manage their customers and manage that multiple listing service on the internet with an app on their mobile phone. They had to do that because actually the real estate brokers are being challenged by things like Zillow, Redfin, those services, Trulia, that make it possible for consumers to drive around a neighborhood and check out the price of your home and see if they'd like to make a bid on it. So they had to actually arm the realtors with their own technology tools. So every part of every business has some element of information in it. And if you don't liberate that information and drive it into the internet and manage it as a business service, someone else will come along and do that to you. And that means that whatever can be turned into vapor, invisible software, that will occur. Books have already been vaporized. Amazon tells us that their e-books, their Kindle books, now outsell hardback and paperback books combined. Music, after 10 years of fighting against this, the music industry has finally capitulated, and new services like Spotify have emerged that provide music on demand, music as a service. Maps have been turned into software, pure software. Remember, there were printing companies like Falk that printed physical maps. That used to be a business. Now it's an app on your phone. You can download it. And it's actually a better service than the original map because it shows you where you are. It orients you. It gives you recommendations and suggestions. I make the argument to TV companies that they are in the process of being vaporized, which they vigorously object to, so I have a lively conversation with them. But then I point to the 50 million people who are now subscribing to services like Netflix that are delivered over the digital network, on demand to whichever device you wish to watch it on. They've liberated the information content in television, and they're now delivering it as invisible software wherever you happen to be, whatever situation you happen to be in, and whatever device you happen to be looking at. Your boarding pass is in the process of being vaporized and replaced by apps like these. This is the Passbook from Apple. If you've used these things, you know that they perform much better than that old paper product. They're smart apps. These apps know if you're making a connecting flight, they know more about the gate information and delays than the flight attendants and the ground staff at the airport do. So this is actually quite an achievement for people. It's quite a benefit. It's not limited to media. This extends to all sorts of things. Last year, I did a lot of work with retailers, particularly in Southeast Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore, which are kind of the shopping meccas of those regions. And there, the retailers are terrified. I mean terrified, petrified, because half the customers walking in their store are having smartphones in their hands. They're literally shopping in a different store while they're standing in the store. They didn't know what to do about it. That was the question they asked me. How can we respond to that? In Korea, they came up with a novel idea. Tesco vaporized the store. Tesco is a UK grocery chain. They wanted to enter the Korean market. They couldn't get good real estate. And so what they decided to do is to take life-size photographs of all the products in their store and turn them into these transparent overlays in the subway station. And people who are waiting for the subway can use their smartphone to make the purchase right there. And then when they arrive at their destination, the products have already been delivered for them. They vaporized the retail out. They saw double-digit increases in their sales. Medical devices are going to be vaporized. I know you have a big medical and biology and biotech sector here in the Charleston region, and so I wanted to share this with you. A couple of years ago, all these new gadgets came out, like this one, Fitbit 2007. This is a gizmo that lets you track your motion during the daytime and track the calories that you're burning, how many steps you've walked, and they kind of turn your life into a game. Well, those were neat a few years ago. Guess what? They've been vaporized. There's an app for that. You can download it for free in the Apple Store. It uses the accelerometer built into your phone to replicate all that functionality. You just don't need to clip that extra thing on now. It's not limited to those consumer-grade things. At UCLA in Los Angeles, they're developing what they call lab on a chip. And as you can see, this is a part that sticks into a smartphone, just like a USB key would stick into a phone. And what that consists of is all the functionality that you used to have in a laboratory. The use case here is out in some regions. Take, for instance, the Congo in Africa, where they have viral outbreaks every season, but it's the rainy season. And you can't drive. The roads are impassable fields of mud. So the only way to get those samples from the region of the outbreak back to the city is by helicopter. It can take 24 hours to get a sample, a blood sample or tissue sample, sent back to a lab in a city, and then they need another 24 hours to run a test on it. With lab on a chip, they'll be able to take a swab from your cheek, run it across that little stick, and they'll be able to use the computer in your phone to calculate the result and get you instant results, thereby saving lives because they'll be able to put people in quarantine faster. They've also developed a thing that blows my mind called organ on a chip. This is a miniaturized version of a human organ. I think this one is a liver. They also have them for the lung and for the kidney. Now, as you know, in the pharmaceutical industry, they need to do testing to make sure that the drugs they're developing don't have adverse side effects. The way we typically do that today is we use animals for that. In China, they kill about 600,000 animals a year doing cosmetic testing. With organ on a chip, what they've done is they've replicated the function of the organ. And it's not a replication, actually. It is a functioning organ. So those are liver cells that are inside that. Human liver cells are inside that organ. They've replicated those cells, and now they can run the test right there, and they get a diagnostic, and they can see how those molecules from that drug or from that cosmetic will interact with that organ and find any adverse consequences that may occur. And they can do that without harming any animals. So that's actually quite a huge breakthrough. Some speculate that money will be vaporized. You probably have heard about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is stirring up a lot of speculative interest. Bitcoin is a secure digital currency. It's totally anonymous, and it's been growing very, very quickly. There's been kind of a speculative rush in the past year as investors became aware of this new currency. It's not printed by a government, so there's actually some doubt about how this is actually going to integrate back into the real world. But in Canada, just a few weeks ago, the world's first Bitcoin ATM machine was introduced. So you can go from that information world back into the real world of physical currency. You can do it in Canada, at least. So what I've just described are two halves of a theory, right? The first part of the theory is that we're turning information into new things. We're literally redesigning the world at the molecular level. And the other half of the theory is that we're taking physical products and we're turning them into pure information that can be downloaded on the phone. And in the process, this information economy is truly reshaping the world around us. What drives this is this principle I call cheaper, faster, better, and smaller. You've seen this in your own lives. Every time you buy a computer or a new phone, you find the thing is more and more capable. Because the microprocessor in it gets cheaper, the memory inside of it gets cheaper, and so forth. So you've seen a fourfold price decrease in Apple's products with a doubling of the computing power. And of course, the whole thing fits in your pocket. So that's where we are today. But that process won't stop. Some people think that mobile, the future of mobile, is the mobile phone. Some people think, well, we've got it. We've perfected that form factor. This is it. I got news for you. That's not it. This process will not stop. Motorola just announced a new project. I think it's called ASUS, where they're going to basically decompose the phone into a bunch of different components, because they noticed that a lot of people, when they drop these, they'll crack the screen, or they'll break apart, or the camera will get broken or something, and you have to replace the whole thing. It's a $600 phone. It's quite an investment people have made. So they said, why don't we turn it into a modular device so that if you want to upgrade the camera or add more storage or add more battery, you can just buy a component and snap it in. This was considered a hobbyist project. It was called Phone Blocks, and I think it was an open source project just a year ago. And a lot of people scoffed at it because they said it'll never happen. Now Motorola is backing it, and with Google support, it will run the Google Android operating system. You're all familiar by now with Google Glass. Google Glass is the idea that we've miniaturized the components in the phone so that they can now be the size of eyewear. And that went through this first round of development. You'll start to see commercially available versions of Google Glass next year. And of course, smartwatches are already hitting the market. So these are smartphones that have been miniaturized down to a level where you can put all the components inside of a watch. And as you're listening to me, you're probably thinking, okay, how am I going to type on that? It's a watch. That's too small. My fingers are too big. Mine certainly are. Well, here's an example of the parts. This shows you how big the components are relative to a penny coin. And they expect that you'll use gestural interface and voice interface. So we're going to actually transform the way computing works. The way to think about this section is to say that the computer itself is going to disappear entirely. The idea of a standalone computer is very quickly going to look like a relic from a previous era. You'll have computing power everywhere. The computer power we bring with us will be wearable. It may be in the form of these bendable, transparent devices. It may be in the form of pure light. This is a project they call SkinPut at Microsoft, where they've compressed or shrunken all the components down into a little pendant that you wear around your neck. It's voice activated. It has a little projector. It also has the phone part built into it. And so if you need a telephone, you simply say to the computer, give me a phone, and you have the dial pad projected onto your hand, and it uses gesture tracking to watch you dial the number or compose text if it's a text message, and then it sends that signal up, but it's just a thing you'd wear around your neck. Now, as we take the computer and shrink it ever smaller, we're going to start to see computer power in all of our devices. You probably have heard about smart appliances. These hit the market in the last 2 years, and this looks like an exciting area for people who make white goods and kitchen appliances and so forth. I just had new AC and heating installed in my house, and while they were installing it, they said, can I get your Wi-Fi password? And I thought the guy wanted to check his email or something, but he was actually setting up my home thermostat so that I can control it right now from my smartphone. From here, I can turn the AC on in my house in Los Angeles, which is kind of a crazy thought. What this means is that we're entering a new era where computers are ubiquitous, and we'll have access to them, and they'll be tracking things through sensors, through motion detectors, and so forth. We'll start to have smart rooms around us, and those will be in a smart house that's full of smart appliances. And of course, that smart house will be connected to a smart grid. By the way, this is great news for Charleston, because I know you have an initiative right here in town, I think out at the Navy base with Clemson University, to develop some of the components of that smart grid. That's fantastic news, because that could be your entry point into the Internet of Things, which I think is going to be such a bigger sector than personal computing. This is about computing power everywhere. All of that smart grid and those smart homes will be connected to the smart city of the future, and I'd encourage you to consider turning Charleston and the broader three-county region into a smart region, whereby city government officials will be able to gather and track trends of data that are yielded from the smart grid and all the connected smart homes and all the smart devices. Driving around on those smart roads will be smart cars, future cars. We already talked about the robot car. They're loaded with telemetry. Now, we know people want this. It sounds a little weird, like a robot car, but we know people want this because everybody knows somebody who does this, right? They take Velcro and they stick their tablet or their iPad or their phone onto the dashboard because they don't like the nav system that came with the car, and they'd like to have the ability to customize it and change it. And the more you think about it, you go, gosh, you know, cars already come with about 25 computers. Most automobiles that are sold today have more computing power than the Apollo spaceship had when they launched that project in the 1970s. And so we have the computing power in the car. We just can't access it or customize it the way we expect to with our smartphone. Our smartphones kind of conditioned us to expect that. So it's quite clear to me that the next wave of computing will be in the automobile. Your car will be the next mobile computing platform. Maybe it won't be this cluttered. I think this is a bit of a joke, this picture. But the idea is you'll be able to download applications and modify your car. Or maybe your car will be smart enough to recommend applications depending on where you are and the context that you're in and where you're going. It's clearly a trend that's happening. It's not limited to our cities. In the oceans, we're starting to put meters on buoys that can measure ocean temperature, current. They can detect seismic activity. And so these are being spread out. Ever since that tsunami in South Asia that killed so many people, this technology is being spread around. In the skies above, we have drones that are measuring and monitoring the ground. We'll have those in the air this year in the United States. And even livestock. We now have livestock that has a RFID tag stuck in its ear. I'm not quite sure what they're measuring, methane output or something. But they generate megabytes of data each year. To summarize this section, I would say what's happening is we're gradually building out an extension of the human nervous system that's going to envelop the entire planet. And so our senses, our intelligence, this exquisite mental apparatus that we have inside us, will now be extended so that we will have sensitivity to every region in the world. As you can see from this map, we have a long way to go. There's a lot of work ahead of us. That's a great big opportunity for the companies that want to be in this space. Let's talk briefly about the architecture of this era. You know, there's a battle going on. The battle I see is a battle between an open environment, transparency, and a closed environment. And we had some conversations last night at dinner about companies that seek to control their information assets and keep them closely guarded and keep them offline. And for security reasons, there's a lot of reasons why companies might wish to do that. But all the growth will come in the form of openness, because this is the biggest driver of innovation and change and transformation ever invented in history. You're probably aware of open source software. You might not be aware that most of the internet runs on open source servers like Apache. Most computer companies are using Linux in some part of their computer, either on the server side to run the server stack, or sometimes in the laptops, even on mobile phones. Mozilla Firefox and a zillion other software tools are available to people on an open basis. So this concept of open source software that everyone can use, anyone can contribute to, and it basically we share back our knowledge and we increase the whole for everybody. It's not commercial, it's free. You might wonder, why would people spend hundreds of hours of their own time? Well, they realize their contribution is going to be to something that's even greater, that'll make life better for everyone else. That principle, which has been so dominant in software for the last 10 or 20 years, is now starting to expand from the information world into the real world. So we now see a new trend in Silicon Valley towards open source hardware, where a company like Facebook can specify from standard off-the-shelf components their own servers, and they no longer need to buy these expensive servers from vendors. And that's starting to spread out. This is a photo of a fellow named Marcin Jabuski. He's from Poland. He is a scientist. He's a physicist, but he also was a farmer. And he got in the farming business, and he promptly went bankrupt. So it turns out if you're a farmer, you have to spend a lot of money on capital infrastructure, like combines and so forth. And they break down from time to time. And when they break down, you might miss your harvest, and that means you might not be able to make payments on the harvester, and lo and behold, small farmers do go bankrupt. It's a real problem for them. Well, he was a scientist, and he said, wait, we have an open source approach in science. We have an open source approach in information technology. Why can't we have open source ecology? And so he started to design open source farm equipment, blueprints that anyone can download and make using standard parts that you could buy at any home supply store. So he started this project, but it's an open source project. Other people contributed to it. Today they have 40 different industrial machines that you can download and make yourself, the full blueprints and instructions for them. Now, this is not going to compete with International Harvester or some major manufacturer. Not at all. That's not the point. This is to enable people in faraway regions, undeveloped regions, so that they can elevate themselves out. They call it the Global Village Construction Kit, because literally you could download this, the whole village could become a farming village and produce at an industrial scale with very little capital investment. Another place where we see open source coming out of the software world into the physical world is in the exciting field of synthetic biology. How many folks are familiar with synthetic biology? Not a lot. All right, it's a great field. Basically what they're doing is they're designing DNA on computers, and then they can synthesize that DNA and insert it into a bacteria or into algae, and it'll replicate. And so you actually can design new life on a computer and go create new life. I know that's rather shocking, and it has some incredible implications. We're now able to make victimless leather. This is leather that is grown from skin cells that have been reprogrammed, but there's no animal involved. There's no animal butchery involved. This summer, the first vat-grown hamburger was introduced. They called it the $350,000 hamburger. They said it was delicious. I sure hope so. But the principle there is if you look at the way we grow livestock for food right now, these factory farms, it's actually quite inhumane. I mean, I think you can say that it's quite inhumane. The experience of those animals is a grim experience indeed. And so some people are starting to question whether that's the best way for us to get the nutrition that humans need. And as other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, emerge and grow, well, those populations are going to want to have meat as well. And so we're wondering, how are we going to feed all these people? How are we going to raise that much livestock? And so the principle is that we'll grow that meat synthetically in a factory. I know it sounds a little bit gross, but honestly, if you go to a feedlot, I drive by them in California, that's just as gross. In fact, I think that people's repugnance is growing for the way we manufacture meat today, and maybe our repugnance towards this kind of vat-grown meat will decline, and perhaps there'll be a nice intersection point where we find that one's a little bit more palatable to us than another. Another promising area of synthetic biology is reprogramming algae to secrete molecules that can be used as fuel or in cosmetics or in pharmacology. And so a scientist can go into a synthetic biology company and say, I need this molecule that doesn't exist in nature. It's an oil molecule, and it has these attributes. Perhaps it's very, very small, so it can pass through the dermis, and it's for some cosmetic product or a skincare product. I can't get that from nature. Can you design an algae that will secrete that? And yes, indeed, they can. They design the DNA on a computer. They synthesize that DNA. They insert it into the algae. Algae grows very, very rapidly. And so you'll find across the United States now there are these the biofuel companies that are using synthetic biology to grow biofuel. Of course, it's not competitive with traditional fuel. Not yet, of course. But what is interesting to note is every air fleet in the United States, every commercial airline is now using some of these biofuels in its fleet today. Now, this process is driven by a large open source movement. So the scientists behind this have done a great job of barnstorming around the country to teach high school kids through things like DIY Bio, to equip teenagers with the skills to learn how to do biology, how to write new life forms on a computer. There are organizations like BioCurious up in the Bay Area, GenSpace in New York, and these are little regional hacker spaces to teach kids how to do biology, but also give them the wet lab so that they can actually make their products right there on the spot. They don't have to send it off to be synthesized elsewhere. That might be something you wish to consider here to cultivate that awareness among the youth here in Charleston. Hackathons are another way to stimulate that kind of entrepreneurial zeal. My friend Jason Kalkanis in Los Angeles, a serial entrepreneur, somebody who's passionate about entrepreneurialism, he recently raised $1 million for a hackathon. So a hackathon is where for 24 or 48 hours a bunch of software developers get together, as you can see in this picture, and they sit down and they bang out some code and they build a new app or they build a new piece of software in 24 or 48 hours. They don't sleep much during that time. And then a panel of judges comes and evaluates the different projects, the state that they're in, and the problem they're trying to solve, and they win an award. This style of award-based incentives has proven to launch more companies faster than anything else. You may be familiar with the incubators. I think you have some here in this region. They often use a hackathon as a means of promoting entrepreneurialism. It's another way to open up this process and bring more people in so they can participate. In California, where I live, the state is also getting involved in an interesting way I thought was worth mentioning. So as I mentioned earlier, wind farms and solar panels, there's been amazing improvement there. As you know, I know you have a wind farm project here, a wind turbine technology here, and I know solar is an important thing in the South. But there's a real problem with it because you can't store it. The battery is the issue, and so you can't get the power on demand when you actually need it. So a lot of that power is captured but wasted. In California, they decided to do something about it. The state's issued a mandate to improve battery power, and so you're starting to see tremendous innovation in the area of batteries. That's languished a little bit, hasn't kept pace with some of the other technologies I talked about. So there's a whole toolkit that you can make use of to spur entrepreneurs. This is the greatest time in history to be an entrepreneur because it's so easy. So many barriers have come down. You can use mobile technology to reach millions of people overnight. And new apps that do launch successfully, they reach millions, sometimes tens of millions of people in the space of a month. Miniaturization and new materials have driven down the cost of manufacturing. On-demand infrastructure and free tools for collaboration, free social tools that allow people to communicate and get their message out. These knock out costs for entrepreneurs. Let me give you one example of something in this zone that I think is quite interesting, the cloud. So I was talking about vaporizing hardware and turning it into downloadable software. That's not just happening on the consumer product level. It's also happening with core infrastructure, the cloud. You're familiar with all of these new services, things like Airbnb and Netflix and Spotify and Dropbox. These are these exciting new services that people can access from any device. What you might not know is they all have one thing in common. They all run on Amazon Web Services. Amazon hosts and manages all of those services. It's really quite extraordinary. Amazon has quietly emerged as an e-commerce company and has become the largest cloud company in the world. They host 1% of internet traffic passes over their servers every single day. 1/3 of internet users touch a service hosted by Amazon, and they are the 4th largest content distribution network in the world. It's quite an extraordinary achievement, and again, it's happened kind of invisibly and off to the side, but I thought it'd be something to share with you today. This section is all about speeding time to revenue and getting entrepreneurs to launch quickly with less capital investment, with less upfront fundraising so that they get to the business of innovating much, much faster. And to cap this section off, let me share with you the thoughts of Andrew Hessel. He's my friend who is one of the pioneers in synthetic biology. And he said this to me earlier this year. He said, Rob, the next biotech billionaire will launch his company at a Starbucks with a smartphone and a laptop computer. That's all the infrastructure he needs. So for synthetic biology, I can design on a browser DNA, and then I click print, and those instructions are sent to a wet lab in China where they actually synthesize the DNA, and they will, as a service, they will grow it in a bacterium for me and run a series of tests to see if it operates and performs as I expected. If it doesn't, they destroy it. They send me an error report, and I can do it again. If it works, then they send it to me on dry ice, and I get that sent back to me. So I don't need to have infrastructure anymore to launch a new business. And this leads us to a new kind of entrepreneur. I think all these technologies change us. The mobile phone changes us. It changes our behavior, changes our expectation of how other devices like TVs should work. But they also change the people who run these businesses. There's a new kind of entrepreneur. And I thought I'd share some of these thoughts with you as my sort of last portion of this talk. There's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world around him, but the unreasonable one persists in trying to get the world to adapt to him. And therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." I was gratified. I've often been called unreasonable as I try to launch things in a hurry around the world, and I'm always urging companies to take the next step, and sometimes they're not ready to do that yet. And so quite often, it's very, very familiar for me to be called unreasonable. People say, Rob, you got to be more reasonable. You got to take, it doesn't work like that here. Now, in my conversations with the folks from the CRDA, I've gathered that there's an element of reasonableness here in the Charleston region, where some folks are saying, gosh, a little too much change. It's all going a little faster than I like. Can't we just slow down and take a break? I'm going to encourage you to be more unreasonable. And I want to give a free pass to anybody in the room who's got the vision and stamina and vigor to be unreasonable, because the world's greatest entrepreneurs, they're the most unreasonable people on earth. Start with Bill Gates. Legendary. When you went to Microsoft to visit him, he would walk out of a meeting. He'd say, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard, and he'd walk out. This guy had incredibly high intellectual standards for the people who spoke to him. He held his company accountable to those standards, and you've seen what's happened since his departure. But he's gone from software to disease eradication, and he's bringing that same intellectual rigor and discipline to the nonprofit organizations that fight those diseases. And so you'll start to see them elevate their game. Steve Jobs, legendary, unreasonable visionary. Legendary. Caustic wit, he could be sarcastic, he'd fire people on the spot, but in the process, he reinvented the computer 6 times in his career. He totally transformed the way we consume media. He changed Disney, the biggest and greatest movie studio of all time. The guy really transformed a lot of things in our lives, and he did it through sheer force of will, force of intellect, and by not yielding, not settling for what the reasonable people would ask for. He would push people to find the greatness within them and strive past those boundaries. You see, these two entrepreneurs were raised in the 60s and 70s at a time when it was fashionable to question authority. And then as they grew up a little bit, they said, why stop there? Let's question everything. And the people inspired by them, they're looking at this equation and they're saying, well, actually, why stop there? Why not reinvent everything? And now what you're starting to see is people who started out their careers in software, working on computers, developing maybe tools or software for the internet. And now they're starting to apply that same intellectual rigor and curiosity, that idea of reinventing everything, they're starting to apply that to old businesses. They're starting to approach those businesses as information silos ready to be exploded. Take, for instance, the guys at Google. So they started out with this notion of the permanent beta. Nothing's ever finished at Google. They're constantly working on their products and improving them and so on. That was a radical vision 10 years ago. It was a crazy notion that you release software that wasn't quite ready. They also figured out how to grow a business at massive scale. And we had an interesting set of discussions last night about Google's about the Google, they have a huge data center here, and they approach their business with a sense of scale. They've shifted now. Now they're focused on space, robotics, robot cars, telecoms. They're launching outrageously grandiose experiments in connectivity, not just in Kansas City, but now with their balloon project, they're going to be bringing that to regions all over the world. And now they just launched a company that is focused on solving the problem of death. That is, they call these moonshots there. These guys are unreasonable thinkers in terms of the scale, size, and scope of their ambition. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, went from e-commerce to cloud infrastructure. He's now making bold investments in space, in privatized space, robotics. And of course, he just bought the Washington Post. Elon Musk, who is kind of a hero for our times, he started out in the payments business. He started PayPal and thereby created hundreds of thousands of new business people, new small merchants, which was kind of transformative. The rest of his colleagues, well, they all went on and launched new internet businesses. He said, why do internet? We did that already. Let's go do something really hard. Let's focus on energy and let's focus on automotive. He launched Tesla, and in his spare time, he launched SpaceX. He's the CEO of 2 incredible companies right now. Tony Hsieh in Las Vegas started Zappos, focused on customer service. The company was acquired by Amazon, and now he's focused on reinventing local government. And so he's bringing all of his wit, intellect, and his unreasonable standards to the city of Las Vegas, saying, why can't we elevate the standing for everybody in this town, not just the people on the Strip? And then there are other unreasonable entrepreneurs like Mark Andreessen, who created Netscape, and he runs his own fund today. And he has unlimited amounts of funding available for people who will reinvent industries. And so they're backing entrepreneurs. They're spreading that around. Now let's get a little unreasonable here for Charleston. Do I have your permission to get just a little bit unreasonable at the parting thought here? The first thing I want you to think about is what makes you unreasonably great. There's a lot of progress. You have a lot to be proud of here. You've assembled some extraordinary industries with great leadership. I think you've done an amazing job of coordinating government cooperation with academia and with private business. That's a great achievement. But you can't stop there, because if you stop, some other city, state, some other place in the world is going to catch up to you, surpass you at some point. And so you have to really say, what are we going to be great at? Not just good at or competitive, but what are we going to be extraordinarily good at, unreasonably good at? I think there are 5 components. People, I travel around the world, people always ask me, how can we create a Silicon Valley here in this part of the world? There's really 5 pieces that you need: finance, talent, and then partners and customers so that those businesses can get growing, and then exits, a way for companies to get acquired. And so you have some of those components here for sure already, but there's no doubt in my mind, and as far as I can tell from everyone I've spoken to in the last few days here in the Charleston region, there's no doubt in my mind that you all understand the number one thing, the most important primary asset you can get is talent. It's attracting the people here, the smart people here who are ready to take on that job of reinventing industries. And what attracts them? It's easy. You know these things, right? They want good housing at reasonable prices. They want great schools, not just decent schools. They're smart people. They want to see their kids grow up and be smart people as well. They want good universities so that they can recruit smart people to come work in their companies. They want a great location. They want a good lifestyle. That you've got in abundance. Trust me, this is a great place to visit. And they need infrastructure. So let's take a look at these and say, gee, where could we do some improvement? Where might we take something today where we're not at the top of our game and improve it such that we can make this a priority for this region to be great at, and I would say focus on education. Great schools for everybody in this region. Great schools for everybody, no matter what race or what background or what gender. Make them available to everybody so you can take the human capital that you already have and elevate it and improve it. And then you need a great research university. Every successful technology hub, every area where there's leadership in the world has a great research university. You have some of the components of that here, but I think that's the hole in your donut that's missing right now, is you don't have that great university. That's so very important. When you go up to Boston and Cambridge, you'll notice that all the exciting startup companies in Cambridge are right across the street from MIT, because the founders went there and they know those people, they understand that school, they know the professors and the faculty there, and they recruit from there. And that's great for the university, and that becomes a magnet that pulls entrepreneurial talent to the city of Boston. You need to replicate that here. And the other thing to consider that you want to be unreasonably great in is infrastructure. And I know in most people's minds that's something like power. I gather you're adequately set with power, or maybe roads. People complain about the traffic. I'd argue it's connectivity. I'd argue that it's connectivity. If you want people to thrive and succeed in the network economy, they need to be familiar with the network economy. They need to be able to operate in the network economy. They need to know it inside and out. They have to grow up in it, and you need the world's greatest connectivity to do that. You don't have that here now. Cities like Kansas City and Austin do, and I think you need to make that a real big priority for you to attract companies, but also to get everyone thinking about this and living it. And then I have one more unreasonable idea for you, and then we'll be finished here. Forgive me, because this is truly unreasonable. You can't be a visitor to Charleston without being aware that Fort Sumter is here. And that was a pretty important milestone. Not because of the Civil War, but because it defined a debate that I think hasn't 100% been resolved to this day. It was a debate that was brewing for a long time before that battle started. As a question about states' rights. States' rights and a certain liberty to experiment and to find your own path. And I know that's a great tradition here in South Carolina. It's one that you can be very proud of. It's always been an interesting dynamic in American history, but this has always been a locus of resistance. You know, the idea of states' rights, where South Carolina is going to pursue a different path. I'm not talking about a new secession. I'm hardly talking about a new a separate confederacy or something. That's not at all the message I'm trying to give you. The point I'm trying to make is that we've experienced in the last 10 years the greatest power grab that's ever gone on, the greatest heist that's ever occurred in human history. Our information, and with it, a great measure of our civil liberties, have quietly been gathered together, and gathered without any debate, without any type of democratic action. Our system has failed us. Reasonable men in Washington who've been following their orders to the T have set about spying on American citizens. This isn't just unconstitutional, although it is deeply unconstitutional. It's even worse than that. They've erected, with our complicit knowledge, and in some cases with us and our elected representatives being totally in the dark, they've erected a perfect police state. It's an opt-in police state where they can track every phone call, every message you send, every document you send, all that information that I talked to you about at the beginning of this talk. All of that information is being gathered up without our permission. And so maybe it's time for a new states' rights message. Maybe it's time for a state to stand up and say, we care about our citizens. We care about the liberty of our citizens. A new definition of liberty, liberty defined as the right to privacy, the right to maintain the integrity of my own information and decide who gets to use it, a right to transparency so that we can see what's being done with our information and where it's being stored and how it's being analyzed, who's using it, who's accessing it. And if you think that's a preposterous notion, if you think that's outlandish or maybe somehow unpatriotic, I disagree passionately with you. I just got back from Europe where this debate is happening right now. And in Europe, I can predict with some certainty that we will see Germany champion a set of laws that will ensure privacy for their citizens. And that is a country that has some experience living in a police state and is not a good experience. And Angela Merkel, who is the head of that country right now, she grew up in that state, and it offends her deeply that her BlackBerry phone was tapped by the NSA. And so you'll start to see this initiative happen elsewhere, and I think it's time for some part of the United States to stand up and say, we too care about the rights of our citizens to privacy. We understand that whatever can become information will become information, and that information has great value. It is a great resource, and we need as a society to have a debate about who manages that information. Let that debate start here. I'm not suggesting anything unpatriotic. What I'm suggesting is go back to the states' rights initiatives that so define the history of this state and start the dialogue, because we haven't had it. America's been silent on this topic for far too long. And if you wish to make a statement about South Carolina's commitment to the information society and the free growth of information and the entrepreneurial zeal of information, I guarantee you this is a way to capture national attention and get the attention of every company in this space. That discussion is happening outside the United States, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Europe right now. It's time to bring that discussion home. I thank you very much for listening to my unreasonable comments and going unreasonably long. Thank you very, very kindly.